Hey, what's going on? So today I'm going to be building a set of deck stairs. So I'm going to teach you how to cut stringers. So to do this is very simple. Once you get the hang of it, there's a little bit of math involved, but it's very straightforward. Basically, we have to figure out the rise and the run of the entire set of stairs. So the rise is how tall each step is, and the run is how deep each tread is. So here's all the tools you're going to need for the job. You're going to need a framing square. You're going to need a pair of brass stair guides for the framing square, a pencil and a tape measure, a circular saw and a jigsaw power, and 2x12s. Now I will only use 2x12s for stringers. I see the pre-built ones in stores are like 2x10s, and that's not enough to give it enough strength after you cut out for the stair. So always use a 2x12 for your stringers. So this is actually a redeck. The framing was still good. We took the decking off. We're going to redo the decking. I like to wrap a picture frame around, and these posts were mounted to it, so I had to build this out so that we had something to put the trim on and have the deck board land on. So now that that's here, I'm actually going to build down some spots a little bit in here and put another 2x4 across, and that's going to give us something to mount these new stringers to. Typically, I like to shoot for around 7.5 for my rise, but in this case, we're trying to go a little shorter. They want to be as short as possible, so we're actually going to go with like 6.25, which I wouldn't normally recommend. I don't even think it meets code, but he wants to be able to have these as short as possible, so we're going to do 6.25. Basically, it's a deck board and then another deck board basically right underneath it, so I'll show you how that all works. It's going to be really dependent on what you're doing. I typically do 7.5, 7.25 because a 1x8 is 7.25, so you could just use a straight 1x8 for your riser. I don't really like to ever go above that. Anything above that is too big. Now obviously every deck, or if you're doing these inside, everything's going to be different depending on your scenario, but what I did basically was I leveled across where the deck is onto the gutter here. I kind of did the math roughly in my head and figured out whereabouts the bottom of the step was going to be. So there's a mark right here, and I measured down, and it is 44.75, but it's a slope. We're on a hill here, so over here when I kind of eyeballed it across, it was like 52-ish, somewhere in there. So basically, if we cut the hill and bring it up a little bit, we want to be somewhere around 50, 52, somewhere in there. So we're going to go do some math and figure out exactly what it is, and I'll show you how to cut them. All right, so all I brought with me was this little index card that has all the important measurements on it that I need to know to make the cuts. All right, so here's my index card. You can see here I have deck frame to end of stringer 75 7/8. That's just what the math worked out to be. And then the deck height is 50 inches. So when you do all the math there, the rise is 6.25 and the run is 10 7/8. And you can see I have to cut out 7 steps in total. And then on the back side of the index card, you can see where I'm going to add the blocking in, and then add a 2x4, and then add a 2x4 on the bottom. But I actually change this up once I go to frame it, so I'll show you that. All right, so I have to crown the board. So what that basically means is you find the curve in it. I want the curve to be up when I cut them, so it'll naturally sag down anyway. So I just want to start it so that the curve is up, and when I cut the stairs, it's going to flex down like that. Okay, does that make sense? All right, so this is really straight board, but I'm gonna say there's a little bit of curve here, so I'm gonna mark it like that. That's gonna be my crown up, so that's gonna be where I'm cutting in. All right, so I've got a 6.25 rise and a 10 7/8 run. So all you have to do that, basically, that's gonna be my cut, right? So these are those little brass clamps I was telling you about. So I'm gonna set these right at those two measurements for 6.25 and 10 7/8. And you can see I've already laid it out which way I've got to cut the stairs to get the most usage out of it, because I've got a 16-foot board, and this is almost 8 feet, so I have to be very careful about how much waste I have left over. All right, so I'm gonna set this side to 6 1/4. And this side to 10 7/8. Hopefully you can see that. 6 1/4 and 10 7/8. And so when you set it on right like that, it's going to be 6 1/4 by 10 7/8. And you can see how much meat it leaves. Now 6 1/4 is not as high of a rise as I would normally do. I normally do 7 1/4 or 7 1/2, but they really wanted these steps to be very short. So that's what it's going to be. But as you can see here, it leaves, if you did it a 7 1/4, it leaves it about a 2 by 6 left over for the stair stringers. That's carrying all of the weight of the stairs, the whole length of the stairs. So I'm going to move that back to 6 1/4 here. All right, so 6 1/4, 10 7/8. Now we're ready to start marking. As I said, I've already got it all laid out the way that I want to cut this. So I just have to transfer this right onto this board. And I'm basically going to start right at the end. I'm going to come in just a little bit to make sure I'm catching meat. And you get it set like that. So that's where I marked that one. And then when I pulled that off, now I'm just going to line this one up with where I left off. So you can see that pencil line, if you just carry that straight through till it hits that brass point. And that's exactly where the next one wants to go. Mark that. And we're just going to work our way all the way down this board. Now on my cheat sheet, I marked how many notches I actually have to mark, and then the one I actually have to cut. So as I'm going down, I'm going to label them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, now that I got them all laid out, I'm going to pull the stops off and we can make our last marks and start cutting. Here's a little tip. Store these like this. Put them together and tighten them to each other. That way you don't lose one or the other, or the screw falls out. You always have them together. Put it in your glove box. All right, so this is actually going to be my top tread, and this is the deck right here. So this is actually the framing. So this is going to get cut off. And to do that, I'm going to square a mark right down off of the line that I've already got, even with the line that's here. Like that. Now I could have done this and tried to make the line long, but it's better, you get more accurate if you just square right off of it. And that should be where you're cutting it, as long as you're putting on a trim piece over that. Now if your trim board is already on, if your riser is already on and your stringer's going on, then you just have to cut off the excess, whatever you need to make up for the riser that's already on. In my case, we've got something really strange going on here. We're using a deck board for the kick plates, and then we're using a white trim board that's 3/4 inch thick around the deck. So it's going to switch from 3/4 inch to 1 inch stock. So I'm going to rip down the deck board so that they're in plane with each other, and there's going to be a trim piece that's going to block it. I'll get to that later on. And I basically have to cut another 1/4 inch off of this just to make up that difference. So you probably won't have to do that. I'm just trying to explain what I'm doing, so if you are like, why is he cutting that? Just so you know. So I'm going to take a 1/4 inch off here. All right, so now I'm just going to mark that. Now that's going to be where I cut, not this one. And then I'll cut this. So I'll cut this first, and then I'll cut that off second. All right, so now I'm down at the end. You can see 7 and 8, but the bottom of 8 is actually where I'm going to cut it, right here. And the ground level is actually going to be 1 inch higher than that, because you have to remember this would be the framing, and then there's a deck board on top of that, 1 inch taller. So normally you would cut this right here if this is landing onto your finished grade. So if you have a patio or something that's already installed and this is landing on top of it, then you would have to cut off whatever the thickness of your deck board is to accommodate for that. In our case, we're burying it, so I'm actually going to run it the full length down and cut it, and then we're going to actually add, well, let me mark this in first. Let me square this off. so we can see what's going on here. Like that. All right, now after this is cut, I'm actually going to add a 2x4 to the bottom of this. And what that does is that gives it some strength, and I'm going to put crushed stone underneath this, and that's going to give this the support and flexibility to be able to like pack stone in and get this thing nice and level where we want it when we go to install it. Now a lot of times if I'm doing this, a lot of times I will actually notch this in. I will leave the end boards full like that, and then the middle ones I will notch the 2x4 in so that they're inset. But in this case I'm just going to install it just like that and put gravel, like 6 or 8 inches of gravel underneath this. Now, as you can see, my 8 foot is right there. So if I cut this and I cut this, then I have plenty left over because this is 16 feet long. I have just enough left to do what I got to do to make a second stringer. All right, so now I'm ready to cut these. All I'm going to do is use the skill saw, and I'm going to hold the guard and basically cut it as straight and perfect as I can. And I'm going to stop right when I get to the point, and then I'm going to go back the other direction and stop right at the point. I'm not going to carry the cut through. To finish the cut, you're going to need a jigsaw to make that cut go all the way through. Now, some guys will cut through with the circular saw, but then you're compromising the strength of the stair by cutting into the joint. All right, here's a couple little disclaimers here. Safety disclaimer: be safe, follow the safety guidelines of the tools that you're using and whatever, and OSHA and all that stuff. Be safe with what you're doing. Also, you want to make sure that your blades are sharp. You want good blades to do this. Dull blades will just make it very difficult, and they can be dangerous if you have dull blades. Make sure your saws are set up to be cutting square, right? You don't want them on bevel or anything like that. You need nice square cuts. And you're probably going to want to wear some safety glasses and some hearing protection. This is pretty loud, and you're going to be cutting a lot of cuts for quite a while. Now, I'm going to do something I do not recommend you do this at home. This is very dangerous, but I wedge a pencil in my saw to keep the guard up so that I don't have to hold the guard and try to do everything all at the same time. I'm very cautious when I do this, so please be careful. I do not recommend trying this at home. Don't do this at home. Now you might have noticed that I let the blade stop spinning before I pulled it out, because if you try to pull it out, you could twist it and catch and end up cutting yourself. So let the blade stop before you pull it out. And if while you're cutting the wood starts to bind on the saw, just slowly, very carefully back it out or lift it up, because if it starts binding and it catches the blade, it can make the saw jump back on you too. Now for my last cut, I've got this set up on the sawhorse with a piece of wood that I can cut into, so I can cut this and not worry about screwing anything up. So I'm just going to cut right until it pops, and then that's it. I'm going to change the depth of my saw so I don't cut all the way through the 2x4. Now that I have my cuts with the circular saw done, I just need to finish it off with the jigsaw. You want a nice, good, straight blade with aggressive teeth, because this stuff's kind of hard to cut through. And basically I just want to follow along the edge right here and not push it anyway. I'm just going to let the saw guide itself right through that hole. Like that. All right, so that's what our cut looks like when we're all done. Now this one fell out already, so I'm just gonna finish off that one, and the rest of them we're good to go. All right, the last thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna write temp on it so that I know that this is my template. I'm gonna use this one to mark out all the other ones rather than doing the square and that whole thing. I'll just lay this on top and mark them. Check this out. All right, now again, you just want to check your crown before we start cutting. So my crown on this piece is going that way. Now here's a trick for getting nice straight lines and making sure that these are all the same. I'm actually going to flip this over. All right. So this is the bottom side that I cut. So the marks that I made that I actually cut are now on the bottom, touching the wood here. So if I mark it right there, those marks will be exactly the same as long as I cut right on those lines. So as long as you've got a good cut, if you flip it over, you'll be good. Now, if you laid it out right, you should have plenty of room on each side, so you don't have to worry about anything. So I'm just gonna slide it to one end or the other just to make life easy. All right, now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make sure they're flush on the back. So I'm just gonna check them, get them set right to each other on the back. Just so you understand what I'm talking about here, flush on the back. So basically like that. You just wanna make sure they're even with each other, like that. And then once you're happy with it, we're just gonna trace it out. Make sure when you're tracing, you're pushing down so the pencil doesn't slide under there. And you wanna get as good as you can right on that edge. All right, so now we have our second one laid out. We're gonna cut this, and then we've got another 16-footer over there. So I'll cut those all up, and then we'll get into installing it. All right, so here's all four. They're all done. Now you may notice there's a little flat spot on this bottom one in some areas and in some spots. And all that is the board was just thinner. It wasn't as wide. And that's actually okay, because as long as our treads and risers line up, that gap will get taken up because the riser and the tread covers it. So you're never gonna see that anyway. So that's about what my stringer is gonna look like. I'm gonna set this so that it's the same as that. Like I said, I'm gonna build something here to catch the back of this. So it will give me something to screw into these rather than just catching on a little lip here. So I'm gonna do that next. And yeah, that's how you cut a stringer. All right, so I made the rise 6 1/4. So all I'm gonna do to set my stringer height is measure down 6 1/4. And set the stringer right to it. So that's where it's gonna land. And we gotta do some grading here to make sure that this is gonna all be perfect. And we'll set the stairs so that these are nice and level, tipped a little bit forwards so that any water will drain off. Next thing I'm gonna do is actually build something in here to catch the back of this. So I like to build down a block and have blocking behind it so that this has something solid that I can screw to and screw in from the back and all that. So this will be super attached because there's gonna be a lot of weight put on here, plus people walking up and down them. So you wanna make sure these are super duper extra, super crazy secure. All right, if you hung around to the end, I wanna show you how I actually attach these. So you can see I put a board here. I cut it on an angle. I ripped it on an angle so that it's the same angle as the stairs. And then behind it, I've actually got boards going down supporting it that are also ripped on the same angle, so you don't even see them. So this is that ripped board, and on behind, it's got these angled pieces that are holding it, and they're all up in the framing and attached in really good. So this thing is not gonna move anywhere. So then when I get my stringer set where I like it, you can see that the angle is gonna carry right up through. So unfortunately the ground's not in the right spot down there, but basically you can see what's going on here like that. So the bottom of the stringer is gonna line right up with this thing and go up like that. And I'm gonna take a galvanized metal strap and nail it into the bottom here and up across the top. So now, not only is it have something to go against that way, but it can never drop down because there's gonna be a metal strap containing it forever. It won't be able to pull it away either. So it's just like a super duper secure way to build a set of stairs. Now, if you know anything about me, that's not surprising. I do everything kind of overkill. I put an extra nail in things. I just want to make sure things are gonna be secure forever. And I'm not gonna have problems, I'm not gonna have callbacks. I want things to last longer than my lifetime. So anyway, all right, so this video is super long. I'm sorry about that, but I just got to the end of editing and I realized I didn't show how I did the footer for the bottom of the steps. So basically all I did was when I set the stringer on there, I marked where the bottom was gonna be. I dug down about 6 or 8 inches and I filled it with crushed stone. They happen to have like some number 1, number 2 mix, which is like the pretty small and a little bit bigger stones. So I used that. I usually use either number 1 or number 2, really depends. Number 2 will drain probably a little bit better. Number 1 will be easier to pack down. And so I set a 2x4 on top of those and I got that nice and level. And then I set the stringers on top of that and screwed into that 2x4 and then backfilled and buried that 2x4 underneath. And then the patio or the walkway is gonna come right up to the bottom of the stringers, so it will cover that bottom 2x4. So I'll show you what that looks like in the next video, I think. So look for it there, all right? So thanks for watching. That's gonna be the end of this. And if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up down below and subscribe and leave me a comment. Let me know what you think and I'll see you in the next video.